The notification came through at 9:47 on a Thursday morning. Not a phone call, not an email. A single push notification from the private holdings portal I had not opened in 11 days. 4 words and a number. Transaction confirmed, $31.4 million. I was sitting in my car in the parking structure beneath the Voss and Partners building, 4th floor down, the kind of fluorescent half-light that turns every face the same pallid yellow. I had been sitting there for 6 minutes, which is 4 minutes longer than I needed to park and 2 minutes longer than any rational person would sit in a parking structure alone on a Thursday morning. But I had needed those 6 minutes. Because in my breast pocket against the left side of my chest was a matte black key card. No logo, no name, just a magnetic strip and a small embossed number, CH-34, Callaway Holdings, 34th floor. 3 floors above the corner office that Gerald Voss had occupied for 22 years. I turned the key card over once between my fingers, slid it back into my pocket, and got out of the car. Here is what 200 people in that ballroom did not know on the night my wife introduced me as her husband who designs things no one ever builds. I owned the company she worked for, not a stake, not a minority position. Not a passive investment quietly accruing in some fund I'd forgot to cancel. 61%. A controlling majority, assembled over 18 months through 4 acquisition vehicles, 3 blind trusts, and a holding company registered in Delaware under a name that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't spent 40 hours parsing SEC filings. Callaway Holdings, LLC. The Voss family had sold pieces of themselves for years to expansion partners, to institutional investors, to private equity firms who'd taken their money and moved on. Gerald had never tracked the downstream transfers carefully enough to notice when those pieces started flowing in one direction. He was too busy being Gerald Voss to watch where his empire was leaking. I had been watching for a very long time. Before we go any further into Nathan's story, and I promise you, it goes further than you're imagining, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or your country in the comments below. It never stops being remarkable to us how far these stories travel, and every single comment means more than you know. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button before we go any deeper. We release stories like Nathan's every week, and you don't want to be the person who finds us after the fact. Now, let's go back to Nathan Callaway, and to the night his wife stood in front of 200 people and handed him the thing he needed most. A reason. I need to tell you who Serena Voss was before she became Serena Callaway, because none of what follows makes sense without it. I met her at an industry dinner in the autumn 11 years ago. She was 29. I was 32. She was at the table in the silk blouse and the precise posture, the one who made everyone around her feel slightly underdressed, and she was laughing at something the man beside her had said in a way that suggested she found it mildly amusing but would not be repeating it. There was a quality to her that I did not have a word for at the time. I have one now. Calibration. Everything Serena did was precisely calibrated to the audience she was performing for. I just didn't understand that yet. I thought it was grace. We talked for 3 hours that night. She was brilliant, genuinely, structurally brilliant. She understood capital flows the way architects understand load distribution. She thought in systems. She asked questions that pushed back, that required a real answer rather than a polished one. I drove home at 1 a.m. with the specific, slightly dazed sensation of a man who has just met someone who might change the shape of his life. She did. I was not wrong about that part. We were married 22 months later in a ceremony at the Voss family estate in Connecticut. Gerald walked her down the aisle with the measured pride of a man transferring an asset to a portfolio he considered worthy but not exceptional. Her brother Marcus, 3 years younger and 12 times louder, stood at the bar throughout the reception and told anyone who would listen that Serena had always gone for the quiet type in a tone that made quiet sound like a consolation prize. I was an architect, a good one. My firm, Callaway Design Group, was 12 people and a reputation built on doing difficult work with exceptional precision rather than large work with impressive marketing. We were not the kind of firm that got mentioned at Gerald Voss's dinner table. We did not design the towers. We designed the spaces inside the towers that made human beings feel, against all the anonymous odds of modern construction, like the building had been built for them. Gerald considered this admirable in a hobbyist sense. In the early years, I did not mind. Serena and I had built something real between us, or I had believed we had. We had a rhythm that I treasured. Saturday mornings at the kitchen table with coffee and competing newspapers, the way she would reach over without looking up to pass me the section she'd finished, as though we had been doing it for 40 years. The trips we took to places she chose and I sketched compulsively in the small leather notebooks I carried everywhere. The conversations, always long, always honest, about what we were building and what we believed in and where we thought the world was going. I loved her. That is not a performance of sentiment for an audience. I loved her the way you love a structure you've spent years inside, knowing every room, every flaw, the places where the light comes in. The problem is that I began to suspect, somewhere in the fourth year, that the structure I loved was not the same structure she was living in. I found out by accident, the way every real discovery happens. It was a Wednesday in February, 16 months before the office party. I had come home early from a site visit, a residential project in Westchester, 37 units, a client I'd been working with for 2 years. The heating system had failed and we'd wrapped at noon. Serena was not supposed to be home until 7. I came in through the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and went to my home office to catch up on drawings. Serena's phone was on my desk. She must have left it charging from the morning. The screen was lit with a notification. I did not mean to read it. I was reaching past it to move my mouse and the preview was there, fully visible from a contact saved only as Jay. Can you talk? He's becoming a problem. Dad's starting to ask questions. I need to know we're still aligned. I stood there for a long time. Jay, I knew who Jay was, Julian Hartley. The managing director of Voss and Partners Development Division. 38. Serena had worked closely with him for 3 years. I had met him 4 times at company events and found him to be the specific variety of charming that requires an audience and evaporates completely in one-to-one conversation. I did not pick up the phone. I did not confront her that evening. What I did was sit at my desk for 40 minutes looking at nothing, while something I had been quietly refusing to name settled into a definite shape. And then I opened my laptop, pulled up the holdings portal I had been building quietly for 14 months, the one Gerald Voss had not yet noticed, and looked at the number. I looked at it for a long time. Then I got up, cooked dinner, and when Serena came home at 7:15, I kissed her on the cheek and asked her how her day had been. She said it had been fine. I said that was good. The pain was there. I will not pretend otherwise. But it did not break into the open the way pain is supposed to. It crystallized instead. It went inward and hardened into something dense and cold and entirely without sentiment, and I found, to my own quiet surprise, that I could function perfectly well around it. That I could sit across from her at dinner and ask about her day and pass her the wine and feel this solid, cold thing inside my chest and simply continue. This is either a sign of great self-control or a sign of something I am still not ready to examine. I suspect it is both. Gerald Voss held 4 dinners per year at the family's townhouse in the East 70s. They were not social occasions in any relaxed sense of the word. They were audits. Gerald invited the people whose opinions shaped his world, arranged them at a table that seated 14, and spent 3 hours performing a version of himself that required an appreciative audience to function. The Anderson dinner was in April, 8 months before the office party. Henrik Anderson was a Danish developer with a portfolio across 4 continents and the specific brand of old money ease that Gerald found both attractive and threatening. He had brought his wife, a former architect named Katrine, who had transitioned into urban planning policy and was, by some distance, the most interesting person at the table. She and I fell into a conversation early in the evening about passive house design in dense urban environments, a subject I had been working inside for 2 years on a project I had not yet been able to discuss publicly. It was a genuine conversation, the kind where both people are thinking rather than performing. Katrine was precise and curious and pushed back on 2 of my positions in ways that required real answers. About 40 minutes in, Gerald leaned across the table. "Nathan designs residential projects," he said to Henrik, with the careful warmth of a man clarifying something that might otherwise be confusing. "Smaller scale. Very tasteful work, not the kind of thing that tends to come across Henrik's desk, but good solid work in its lane." He smiled at me when he said it. "The kind of smile that is technically a compliment and functionally a dismissal," I said. "That's kind, Gerald," and returned to my conversation with Katrine, which was the more interesting one. Under the table, my right hand had moved to my breast pocket. The key card was there. I touched it once, feeling the smooth, matte surface against my fingertip. I said nothing further to Gerald that evening. I noted the moment in the small leather notebook I kept in my jacket pocket, not in code, not in euphemism. Just the date and the sentence, smaller scale, very tasteful, not Henrik's desk. The ledger had 16 entries by this point. It would have 31 by the night of the office party. I found out about the group chat by accident, the way I had found out about most things. Serena had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter on a Sunday morning in June while she went upstairs to shower. I was not looking at her screen. I was making coffee, and the notification banner dropped from the top with a sound I had learned to register the way you register a footstep in a house you know well, not with alarm, but with attention. The group was called the Voss Table: Gerald, Serena, Marcus, Serena's mother Claudette. The message that had notified was from Marcus. Saw Nate's firm website, still doing apartment interiors LOL. 7 years later and the man is still wallpapering people's kitchens. Serena, you really did go full Florence Nightingale on this one. 3 responses, a laughing emoji from Claudette, a longer message from Gerald. The boy has always lacked ambition, good heart, no architecture. And then from Serena, a single line that I read 3 times before I was sure I had read it correctly. Don't be cruel, he tries his best, he tries his best. Not, he's building something remarkable, not, you don't understand what he's doing. Not even silence, which would have been a kind of loyalty. He tries his best. I finished making my coffee. I heard the shower upstairs. I stood at the kitchen counter and drank half the cup before I moved. I opened my phone and forwarded the screenshot to my own email. Then I cleared the sent folder. I wrote 2 sentences in the leather notebook. He tries his best. Wallpapering people's kitchens. Then I added a third, 31 entries. 2 months before the office party, Gerald asked to meet me for lunch. This was unusual. Gerald and I did not have a history of one-on-one lunches. Our relationship existed almost entirely in the context of family occasions, where Gerald could perform warmth in front of an audience without ever having to sustain it in private. A solo lunch meant something was being prepared. We met at his club on 60th Street, the kind of place where the lighting is dim enough to feel serious and the menu is short enough to feel expensive. Gerald arrived 7 minutes after me, which was a deliberate calibration. He was not late, but he had allowed me to be seated and waiting, which established something about the architecture of the meeting before either of us had spoken. He ordered for both of us without asking. I noticed. I did not comment. We talked about the family for approximately 4 minutes. He asked about a project I was working on with the specific incuriosity of someone who has asked the question before and filed the answers under irrelevant. Then he put down his fork, aligned it with the edge of his plate in the way that meant he was transitioning to the actual purpose of the conversation, and looked at me with the measured regard of a man who is about to do someone a significant favor. Nathan, he said, I want to talk to you about an opportunity. The opportunity was this: Voss and Partners was consolidating its property management division. They were taking several buildings currently managed by an outside contractor and bringing the function in-house. They needed someone to run the logistics division, someone dependable, organized, detail-oriented, with enough general knowledge of property to not embarrass himself in front of a building super. He described it for 3 minutes before I understood what it was. He was offering me a facilities manager position, not by that name. He wrapped it in language about operational leadership and portfolio integrity. But what he was describing, overseeing maintenance schedules, coordinating service contracts, managing the vendors who fixed the boilers and changed the light bulbs, was not a strategic role. It was a junior administrative position with a title designed to make the person holding it feel better about what they were actually doing. He watched me while he described it. There was something in his expression that I had seen before in the faces of people performing charity, a particular compression around the eyes that reads as concern but functions as pride. I know things have been difficult, he said. This would be stable, good income, work that matters to the family, work that matters to the family. I looked at my plate for a moment. I looked at Gerald. I thought about the $31.4 million notification that had come through at 9:47 on a Thursday morning. I thought about 61%. I thought about the matte black key card in my breast pocket. That's very generous, Gerald, I said. So you'll consider it. I'll think about it, I said. He nodded with the satisfaction of a man who has done a good deed and expected to be thanked more enthusiastically, but is prepared to accept the lesser version. I wrote 1 line in the notebook that evening, offered janitor with a title. Accepted offer to think about it. He does not know what he is thinking about. The annual Voss and Partners Winter Party was held on the second Friday of October at the Meridian Grand, a hotel ballroom in Midtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park, and a capacity for 300 that felt intimate when it was at two-thirds. They held it every year. It was, by industry standards, a significant event, the kind of party that people in New York development attended to be seen attending rather than because they expected to enjoy themselves. I had been to it twice before. Both times Serena had introduced me with the brisk warmth of someone managing a slightly inconvenient logistical detail. I had smiled, shaken hands, found corners with interesting people, and left when she was ready to leave. This year was different. I knew it would be different before we arrived. I had been measuring the temperature of things for 16 months. I knew the shape of what was coming. What I did not know was the exact form it would take, the specific words, the specific audience. We arrived at 7:30. Serena was in a deep burgundy dress I had not seen before. I was in a charcoal suit and the white shirt she had laid out for me, which I noticed with a kind of detached interest. She had chosen my outfit for an event at which she was about to diminish me. The incongruity was either unconscious or very carefully planned. With Serena, it was never safe to assume unconscious. The ballroom was already well populated. Somewhere between 180 and 200 people, the specific density where a room feels full but hasn't yet tipped into crowded. Gerald was at the center of a group near the bar, performing at full volume. Marcus was beside him, pink-faced and loud, already on what appeared to be his third drink. Serena moved through the room the way she always moved through a room she owned, with the relaxed authority of someone who knows exactly where every piece of furniture is in the dark. She knew names. She stopped and touched shoulders and laughed at precisely the right moments. I followed at the slight remove that had become our natural arrangement in public. The moment came 40 minutes in. We had been intercepted by a cluster of 4 people near the windows, 2 Voss partners I recognized and 2 I didn't, one of whom was a woman named Patricia Crane, head of acquisitions at a firm I knew well. Patricia was sharp and warm and had the quality of genuine interest that makes people feel seen rather than processed. She asked Serena about a development deal. She asked about the company's direction. And then, with the natural curiosity of someone who had not yet been briefed on the correct thing to feel about me, she turned to me and asked what I did. I opened my mouth. Serena spoke first. "Nathan's an architect," she said, with the bright efficiency of someone summarizing a document they've already read. "Small residential work mostly, interiors, renovations, not commercial scale." She smiled at Patricia. "He has wonderful taste." Patricia said that was interesting. She was too well-mannered to let the slight land visibly. One of the partners, a man named Desmond, whose name I had seen on Voss memos for years, made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. "An architect who sticks to residential," he said. "There's something almost monastic about that. A principled retreat from the market, or a practical one," the other man said, and several people smiled. Serena did not correct them. I said, "There's a lot of interesting work at that scale." "I'm sure there is," Desmond said, and moved back to talking to Serena. I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, then I excused myself to find a drink. But that was not the worst of it. The worst came an hour later when Gerald gathered a group of 20 or so for an informal toast near the center of the room. A loose circle of the firm's senior people, partners, a few external guests. I was at the edge of it because I was Serena's husband and Serena was near the center of it. Gerald raised his glass. He talked about the year, about the firm's performance, about the legacy of Voss and Partners and the people who had built it. It was the kind of speech he had clearly given 30 times. The words arrived in the same order each time, worn smooth with use. And then he looked at me. "We're also lucky," he said, with the warmth of a man who has decided to be generous, "to have the extended family here tonight. Nathan has been part of our world for nearly a decade." He paused. "A good man, dependable. Sometimes I think if the firm ever needs someone to oversee the maintenance side of the portfolio, Nathan would be the natural fit." He smiled. "He understands detail, laughter, not cruel laughter that would have been easier to absorb, social laughter, the automatic, frictionless variety that keeps the surface of a room smooth." I smiled. I looked at Serena. She was looking at her glass. Not at me, at her glass. And in that specific 4-second moment, my wife looking at her glass while 200 of her colleagues laughed at the idea of me overseeing maintenance contracts, something that had been building for 16 months, reached its terminal point. I was done, not with anger, not with grief, with something colder and more permanent than either of those. I was simply finished with the version of this story in which I was a peripheral character, the the version in which I was the maintenance man. The version in which Serena Calloway looked at her glass. I found Daniel Acaffer at the bar 40 minutes later and said 2 words to him. Next week. He nodded once and ordered another drink. I had installed the home network monitoring system 14 months ago under the cover of a security upgrade. It was not recording. It was simply logging traffic data, call duration, connection times. Nothing that could not be explained as standard network administration. The call came through on a Tuesday evening at 9:14 p.m. Serena was in the kitchen. I was upstairs. The log showed a 47-minute call to Julian Hartley's number. I did not need to hear the content. What I needed was the timestamp, because the board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. And a 47-minute call to the managing director of the development division at 9:14 p.m., 6 days after the office party, told me everything I needed to know about what was being discussed. She thought she was planning a future. She was not aware that the future had already been planned. I went downstairs at 10:02 and found Serena washing a single glass at the sink, the specific thoroughness of someone who needed something to do with their hands. Long call, I said. Work, she said. Julian, the Midtown deal at 9 in the evening. These things don't keep business hours. I said, fair enough. I poured a glass of water. I touched the key card through my shirt pocket. I went back upstairs. The ledger now had 31 entries. I photographed every page that night and sent it to Daniel's encrypted folder. The 34th floor of the Calloway Holdings suite looked nothing like an architect's office. It looked like a machine room. 3 monitors on a long desk, financial terminals running live portfolio data, a full wall of printed acquisition documents filed in chronological order. In the corner, a whiteboard with the full ownership structure of Voss and Partners, the original family stake, the private equity positions, the downstream transfers, the blind trusts, the 4 acquisition vehicles I had used to consolidate majority control. A chart that had taken me 18 months to build and would take anyone who hadn't built it approximately 8 hours to understand. Daniel Acaffer stood at the whiteboard on the Wednesday evening before the board meeting with his jacket off and his reading glasses on, which is how I knew he was taking something seriously. Walk me through the board composition one more time, I said. He did. 11 members. 6 independent directors who had been appointed under prior ownership structures and whose primary loyalty was to fiduciary return rather than to the Voss family. 2 family representatives, Gerald and a cousin named Theodore, who attended meetings remotely from London and abstained from most votes. 2 institutional seats held by funds that Calloway Holdings had acquired 12 months ago and whose voting rights had been transferred. And the 11th seat, the CEO seat, currently vacant following the quiet retirement of the previous non-family CEO 8 weeks ago, a retirement I had been carefully facilitating for 6 months. Calloway Holdings controls 7 votes, Daniel said. 7 of 11, the motion to appoint will pass. Gerald has 2 votes and Theodore proxies 1, they cannot block it. Does Gerald know yet? Gerald, Daniel said, removing his glasses and folding them, has no idea that the 4 acquisition vehicles he sold equity to over the last 4 years share a single beneficial owner. He does not know that beneficial owner is you. He does not know about the board meeting agenda. I stood at the window. The city was spread below in its extraordinary indifferent sprawl, 10,000 lit windows, each one a small structure of ambition and necessity and ordinary human drama. And Serena, I asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment. She'll find out the same time everyone else does. I turned from the window and picked up the matte black key card from the desk. I held it for a moment, CH-34, the embossed number cool under my thumb, and then placed it in my breast pocket. Thursday at 2, I said. Thursday at 2, Daniel said. He stayed to help me prepare the board presentation. We worked until midnight. At one point, he poured 2 glasses of scotch and set one beside my laptop without comment, which is the kind of thing Daniel Acaffer had always done, understood the emotional register of a moment, and responded to it in the least sentimental possible way. When I finally looked at the consolidated portfolio valuation on the center monitor, the full current valuation of Calloway Holdings' position in Voss and Partners, including the development pipeline, the commercial assets, the management contracts, the number was $118.7 million. Not a stake, not an investment, an empire that Gerald Voss had sold to his son-in-law over 4 years without ever knowing it. I had known Daniel Acaffer for 19 years. We had met as junior associates at the same development firm in our late 20s. He was corporate transactional law, I was design, and we had been placed on the same infrastructure project for reasons that probably made sense administratively and made no obvious sense to either of us. We had argued about everything for 3 months and become close friends in the way people become close friends in their 20s, which is to say completely and without much deliberation. He was the most structurally precise thinker I had ever met. He thought the way I designed, from the foundation up, never decorating a surface before the load-bearing work was done. He had built a boutique and a practice that was by reputation the most discreet firm in New York, which is not the same thing as the most famous, but is in many ways more valuable. He was also the only person on earth who knew the full architecture of what I had been building. I had told him 15 months ago, over dinner at a restaurant in the West Village, that neither of us would remember the name of. I had laid it out completely, the acquisition strategy, the blind trusts, the timeline, what I believed was happening in the Voss family's understanding of their own company. I had expected questions, perhaps reservations. What I got from Daniel was a 15-second silence followed by a single question. What's the target ownership percentage? 61, I said. He had written a number on a napkin. At current valuation, that's approximately $94 million in committed capital. I'm aware. Another pause. Then, when did you start? 14 months ago. He looked at me over the rim of his glass. There was something in his expression I had never seen from Daniel before, not admiration exactly, but its more precise cousin, recognition. I always thought you were the quietest person in any room you were in, he said. I'm revising that assessment. He handled every legal instrument from that evening forward. He worked on a retainer that I insisted on paying, and he consistently invoiced at 40% below his standard rate, which I chose not to argue about because arguing with Daniel about money was an experience similar to arguing with load-bearing concrete. On the morning of the board meeting, he arrived at the Callaway Holdings suite at 7:30 a.m. with a leather portfolio under his arm and the unhurried manner of a man going to a meeting he has already decided the outcome of. "How are you?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "You don't have to be." "I know," I said. "I am." He looked at me for a moment with the particular care of someone who has known you for 19 years and knows the difference between fine and fine. Then he opened the portfolio on the desk and said, "Let's go through the agenda." The board meeting was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. on Thursday at the Voss and Partners headquarters on the 31st floor of a building in Midtown that I had now spent more time in than most of its employees realized. The meeting had been called under a standing agenda item, executive appointments. The formal notice had gone to all 11 board members 4 days prior. Gerald, receiving a board notice regarding executive appointments for a company he still believed he substantially controlled, would have read it with the comfortable complacency of a man who expects the result to confirm what he already knows. He would have been wrong. I arrived at the building at 1:30, not at the 31st floor entrance, at the 34th floor entrance. I went to the Callaway Holdings suite, set my briefcase on the desk, and stood at the window for 3 minutes. The city in afternoon light has a different quality than the city at night, less romantic, more structural. Just buildings and distance and the flat gray sky pressing down on everything. I had always found it easier to think clearly in that kind of light. The leather portfolio on my desk contained 6 sets of documents. Daniel had prepared them with the meticulous care of someone who understands that the physical weight of paper in a room changes the emotional architecture of what happens next. The documents were the full ownership disclosure of Callaway Holdings and its subsidiary acquisition vehicles, the consolidated share register showing my 61.3% controlling position, the board resolution for executive appointment, my formal acceptance letter, a brief CEO transition statement for staff, and at the back, printed and paperclipped separately, the complete Voss and Partners WhatsApp group chat, 19 months of messages, exported and annotated. The last document was not part of the formal board presentation. It was for Gerald specifically. At 1:47, I put on my jacket, I straightened the collar, I checked my breast pocket, the key card was there. I picked up the portfolio and took the elevator down 3 floors. The 31st floor boardroom of Voss and Partners was a glass-walled room at the building's northwest corner, floor-to-ceiling panels looking out over the city on 2 sides, a long table in pale ash that seated 14, the kind of lighting that was designed to feel natural and succeeded well enough. A room that cost money to build and was intended to communicate without stating that the people who worked in it were serious people whose decisions had weight. I arrived at 1:58. 9 of the 11 board members were already seated. Gerald was at the head of the table in his characteristic posture, back straight, reading glasses on his forehead, a printed agenda in front of him that he had not yet looked at. He was talking to the board member beside him with the easy authority of a man who owns the room he is standing in. He looked up when I entered. The change in his expression was not dramatic. It was a microcompression, a single beat of confusion that was gone in less than a second, replaced immediately by a version of welcome that was more performance than warmth. "Nathan," he said. "Gerald," I said. I set my portfolio on the table, second seat from the head, the seat that corresponded to the board position held by Callaway Holdings. I did not explain why I was sitting there. I took off my jacket, folded it over the chair back, sat down, and opened the portfolio. Gerald watched me do this. His hand was resting on the table, and I noticed his index finger make a single small movement, the kind of involuntary physical tick that occurs when the brain is processing information faster than the body can keep up. He did not say anything. The remaining 2 board members arrived at 2 o'clock. Daniel Aucaffer entered at 2:03, precisely as we had agreed, with his own leather portfolio and the composed expressionlessness of a senior attorney in a significant meeting. He took the seat beside mine. Gerald looked at Daniel, looked at me, looked at the portfolio. "Nathan," he said again, and this time the word had a different quality, less welcome, more question. "We're ready to start," I said. The board chair, Marilyn So, an independent director who had been on the board for 7 years and whose primary quality was a remarkable imperviousness to social pressure, called the meeting to order. Gerald had still not looked at his agenda. He looked at it now. The first item was standard, minutes from the prior meeting. Gerald nodded through it with the mechanical approval of a man buying time. The second item was the acquisition update, 2 paragraphs that required no vote. Gerald nodded again. Item 3, executive appointments, CEO. Marilyn So looked at her papers and said, "Before we move to the formal vote, I understand there is a disclosure to be made by the Callaway Holdings board seat." Gerald said, "I'm sorry, the Callaway Holdings board seat?" "Yes," Marilyn said. She looked at me. I opened the portfolio. I did not raise my voice for the entirety of what followed. Not once. "Callaway Holdings, LLC," I said, "holds 61.3% of the issued share capital of Voss and Partners as of market close yesterday." I slid the ownership disclosure across the table to Gerald. The acquisition was completed in 4 tranches over 18 months through the following vehicles. I read the names of the 4 acquisition entities without inflection, the way you read a structure report, not with drama, just with precision. Each transfer was disclosed in the relevant regulatory filings. The consolidated ownership position is documented in full in the disclosure package before each of you. The boardroom was very quiet. Gerald had picked up the document. He was looking at it with the expression of a man encountering a language he does not speak but recognizes. "This is a mistake," he said. "It is not," I said. "These entities," he stopped. His reading glasses came down from his forehead. He read the document with them on. The room waited. "These are the same entities that the Penn Group sold to, that the Hartman Fund transferred to." He looked up. "You're telling me that all of these flow to a single beneficial owner," Daniel said. "Callaway Holdings, registered in Delaware. The beneficial owner is Nathan Callaway." Gerald Voss set the document down. I had imagined this moment a number of times over 18 months, and in none of those imaginings had I been entirely prepared for what it would actually look like. The specific quality of the silence. The way a man's face changes when the architecture of his life is revised without his permission. He looked at me with something I had not expected. Not fury, something rawer than fury, something that was almost bewilderment. "You," he said. "Me," I said, and then, because the ledger was there and the moment had arrived and I had waited 31 entries for it, I opened to the annotated section and read, "Smaller scale, very tasteful, not Henrik's desk." I looked at him. "April 9th, your dining room." I wrote it down. He said nothing. The boy has always lacked ambition. Good heart, no architecture. I looked at him. "June 14th. WhatsApp. I have the full export if you'd like to review it." Gerald's jaw tightened. "Sometimes I think if the firm ever needs someone to oversee the maintenance side of the portfolio, Nathan would be the natural fit." I looked at him. "October 12th, the Meridian Grand. In front of 200 of your employees." The room was absolutely still. "I have been a majority owner of this company," I said, "for 7 months. I have attended your dinners. I have sat at your table. I have listened to your assessment of my capabilities, and I have found it educational. I am now formally disclosing my ownership position and exercising my voting rights in favor of the following resolution. I slid the board resolution to Marilyn So. She read it aloud. The motion, to appoint Nathan Callaway as Chief Executive Officer of Voss and Partners, effective the 1st of the following month, at a compensation structure detailed in the accompanying schedule. The motion carried. Marilyn So said, the resolution passes. Mr. Callaway is appointed CEO with effect from the 1st of November. She said it the way she said everything, without drama, without visible emotion, with the quiet authority of someone to whom facts are simply facts. I closed the portfolio. Gerald had not spoken again during the vote. He sat with both hands flat on the table, looking at a point somewhere between the table's surface and the middle distance, with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not rage, not indignation, something older and smaller and more honest than either of those. I looked at him for a moment. I'll be in touch about the transition schedule, I said. The board meeting was not a public event. But in any organization of 300 people, information moves in the way water moves, finding the available path, arriving everywhere eventually. By 4:30, Daniel told me later, the news was in the building. By 5, it had reached the development division. By 5:17, I have this from the building access log, which was now my access log. Serena swiped her key card to enter the 34th floor. I was at my desk. I had known she would come. I had not known the exact time, but the building was mine and the logs were mine, and there was a particular inevitability to it that required no prediction. She stood in the doorway of the Callaway Holdings suite and looked at the room, the monitors, the whiteboard, the ownership chart, the 26 months of quietly assembled architecture spread across a room 3 floors above her father's office, and then she looked at me. She was wearing the same burgundy dress she had worn to the office party. I don't know if that was intentional. I suspect not. Nathan, she said. Serena, I said. She looked at the whiteboard. She looked at the ownership chart. She looked at the number on the center monitor. How long? She said. 22 months, I said. She was quiet. While you were, she stopped, recalibrated. At the party, when my father made that toast, you already 7 months prior, I said. She sat down in the chair across from my desk. Not the chair of someone making an argument. The chair of someone whose legs have decided to stop waiting for instructions. He tries his best, I said. I said it quietly. I was not performing it. She looked at the desk. I have your WhatsApp messages from June 14, I said. I have the thread, all of it. She did not deny it. I am not going to use them as a legal instrument, I said. I am going to use them as information, the same way I use everything. Serena Callaway looked up at me then, and for the first time since the night at the industry dinner 11 years ago when I had sat across from a woman who asked questions that required real answers, I saw something genuine in her face. Not remorse, not yet, something anterior to remorse. The moment before a person decides to stop performing and speak plainly. I underestimated you, she said. Yes, I said, you did. She left at 6:15. I watched the city in its late October light and felt, this is the part I had not prepared for. Almost nothing. Not triumph, not vindication, not even the clean satisfaction I had imagined. What I felt was a profound and slightly terrifying quietness. The silence of a structure after the last beam is in place, before anyone has moved in, before it becomes anything other than what it was built to be. I had built this. Every piece of it, alone, quietly over 22 months, in the time between the ordinary moments of a marriage I was watching die. I did not feel proud of that. I felt done. What happened to each of them afterward is not a story of cruelty. I want to be precise about that. What happened was proportional. It was the natural consequence of the structural decisions each person had made, arriving on schedule the way structural consequences always do. Gerald retained his 2 board seats. He remained a significant minority shareholder, 22.4%, a position worth, at current valuation, approximately $26 million. He was not removed. He was not expelled. He was not publicly humiliated in any deliberate way. He was, however, required to attend the November all-hands where I was formally introduced as CEO to the full staff of Voss and Partners. He sat in the 3rd row. He was not asked to speak. He listened while 300 people received their new leadership without appearing to find it remarkable. Afterward, at the reception, 2 of Gerald's most significant development partners, men he had known for 15 years and whose social regard he valued more than he would have admitted, spent 40 minutes in conversation with me about the firm's new direction. They were engaged and warm and spoke to me with the specific attentiveness people reserve for conversations with people whose decisions will matter to them. Neither of them crossed the room to speak to Gerald that evening. I don't believe he missed it. 6 weeks after the board meeting, Gerald withdrew from the two industry associations he had served on for a decade. His business partners, several of whom had received the ownership disclosure as required regulatory notification, began to understand the shape of what had been assembled under their noses. The stories people told about Gerald at dinner parties began to have a different inflection. He did not get a redemption arc. That was not mine to give him. Marcus's position at the firm, a VP title that had more to do with family lineage than demonstrated capability, was reviewed as part of the leadership transition. The review was conducted by the CFO and two independent HR advisors, which is to say it was conducted correctly and without my direct involvement. The outcome was a restructured role. The title remained. The budget authority was substantially reduced. The team that had reported to him was reorganized under a more experienced director. Marcus spent approximately 3 weeks being very loud about this in contexts where his family would hear him. Then he spent 2 weeks being loud about it in contexts where the firm's new leadership would hear him. Then he was quiet. The Voss Table group chat went dormant in November. It was not active again by the time I last had reason to check. I had no further reason to check. Julian Hartley resigned from the firm in December, which I had neither requested nor engineered. He cited a new opportunity in the standard language of professional departures that does not explain the departure. The timing, 6 weeks after the ownership disclosure, told its own story. I wished him well. I meant it more than he would have believed. Serena and I separated formally in November. The divorce proceedings were handled by attorneys as these things should be, and were completed without the bitterness that these things often produce when one party believes they have been wronged and the other believes they have been right. We had both been right about some things and wrong about others. The ledger, if I am honest, did not run entirely in one direction. The settlement was straightforward. I had no interest in punishing her financially. The terms were fair. She left the firm, she had insisted on this, and I had not argued, and took a position at a smaller development company. A real one, not a consolation role. She was, whatever else had been true between us, genuinely talented at what she did. The new position suited her. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she was good at it. I did not follow this news closely. It was not my architecture anymore. The letter arrived in late March, handwritten. No return address on the envelope, though the handwriting was one I recognized immediately. 3 paragraphs. I will not reproduce them here because they were not written for reproduction. They were written in the specific language of private admission, the kind that has no audience and asks for nothing. The kind that takes more courage to write than anything performed in public. The key sentence was the second one in the second paragraph. I am not writing to ask for anything. I am writing because I spent a long time telling myself a story about what we were that served me and not us, and I think you deserve to know that I know that. She did not ask for a response. She did not ask for anything at all. I read the letter twice, standing at the kitchen counter in the apartment I had taken in the West Village, a high-ceilinged floor-through with exposed brick and afternoon light that came in at an angle I had liked when I saw it and liked more every morning I woke up in it. I set the letter on the counter. I did not reply, but I did not throw it away. I put it in the small cedar box on my desk where I keep the things I need to keep: a photograph of my parents, the key fob from the first project I ever finished, one of the small leather notebooks, complete. The letter went in there among the genuine things, and I felt setting it there something I had not expected, not forgiveness, which requires a fuller accounting than I was ready to give, not relief, which implies the prior presence of dread. Something quieter and more honest than either, the specific sensation of a chapter that has reached its actual end, not a dramatic end, not the end of a trial or a sentence or a war. Just the end of a long structural project, completed as well as it could be completed with the materials available, delivered on time, built to last. I am still an architect. Whatever else has changed, that has not. I still think in foundations. I still believe that the most important thing about any structure, a building, a business, a life, is what it is built on, and that the surface can be as beautiful as skill and imagination can make it. But if the foundation is dishonest, the structure will fail. It always fails. The only variable is the timing. Gerald Voss built an empire on the assumption that wealth confers insight. That proximity to money is equivalent to understanding its nature. That the man in the quiet suit with the small firm designing things no one would recognize must therefore be someone who does not understand the game. He was wrong about all of it. The quiet man in the room is not always powerful. But he is always the one worth watching, and the moment everyone else in the room decides he isn't, that is the most dangerous moment of all. Not for him, for them. There is a design principle I have worked with for 20 years. Load-bearing structures do not announce themselves. The columns that hold a building up do not wear their function on the surface. They stand where they are placed, and they carry what they are given, and they wait for the stress test that will determine, once and for all, what they are made of. I was placed, I carried what I was given. I waited. The test came in a hotel ballroom in October, in burgundy and low light, in front of 200 people who found me collectively forgettable. The result was what it was always going to be. What I want to leave you with is not the number. Not the 61%, not the $118 million, not the 7-2 vote in a glass-walled boardroom on the 31st floor. What I want to leave you with is something smaller, the key card. It is still in my breast pocket, CH-34. I don't carry it for status. I don't carry it to remind myself of what I did. I carry it because every person who has ever been reduced to a footnote in someone else's story of themselves deserves to have a thing in their pocket that tells the truth about who they actually are. A private object, a private fact. Something that doesn't need an audience to be real. You carry yours too, whatever form it takes, you know what I mean. The story of Nathan Calloway is ultimately not about an acquisition or a boardroom or a controlled detonation. It is about what happens when a person decides that the version of themselves that the world is performing is not the version they are willing to accept. His journey from being the man at the edge of the circle, quietly absorbing what was said about him, to the man whose signature appears at the top of every contract in that building, it is a testament to one thing above all others. Patience is not passivity, silence is not submission, and the foundations always outlast the decoration. We want to hear from you. Was Nathan right to do this the way he did it, building his answer in the dark, quietly over 2 years without ever confronting anyone directly? Or was there another way through? Let us know in the comments. There are no wrong answers here, and we read every single one. If Nathan's story moved something in you, please support this channel by giving it a like and subscribing for more stories like this one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here.